Hey, what's up everybody? Rob here from Ram Studio Comics. Welcome back. So in today's video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the buildings in this scene and how I construct them and some of the tips for that. I've got a couple things for you because I've actually changed the way that I've been doing things and it's working out pretty well. So let me explain that. So I actually posted this on a few different social medias, Instagram, Facebook, stuff like that. And I had some different questions. And so I figured a video response would be the best way to approach it. A lot of it was essentially focused around the perspective drawing. And so people could see the grid and they were kind of wondering, like, why do you have a grid there? Doesn't Procreate have the tools you need for perspective drawing? And it does, but I actually like using both. So let me show you why. So some people thought it was Clip Studio Paint because Clip Studio Paint will actually project these grid lines. I actually don't like them. I like to be able to control where they're at. So I draw them out. And so why do I do both? Let me show you. So one of the things is that when you've got both, it allows you to do a couple things. So let me get rid of Spidey here for a second. Get him out of there. I actually add him as his own layer as well as a flood layer so that I can draw behind. Normally I draw the whole scene behind. I think it's important to do because it's actually almost faster and you don't have the problem of stopping and starting window patterns, which can be a pain. It kind of forces you to maybe misalign a window. It's just like drawing limbs of your character. You draw through the character so that you get your alignment properly. But anyways, so with this, I like the grid first, and I've got the grid below this blue layer that's set to screen mode. That's what the little S is there. So if I toggle that off, you see it darkens it. So I like it set to a very light, but I drew that in with the initial perspective. So let me get rid of these. Show you what I got here. So all this jazz right there. So there's that perspective grid, okay? Now what I tend to do first is rough out a concept. So if I went back, I'm going to share this video later, but I'm going to do a time-lapse replay real quick just to show you. I was like doing this, trying to figure out the pose. Got a weird leg going there, as I often do. And that's about where, let me see, I think I did a little bit. Yeah, see that building sketch right there? It's pretty bad, but right there. So I do a very rough thumbnail sketch, okay? That's always the first thing. I have to get an idea going. I don't just throw in perspective guides. So maybe you're good at that. I'm not. I need to rough out the concept first and then elaborate. Okay, and then you see I start tweaking things, moving things around. Another one of the questions that I got was, do you use pose dolls? And I have one, but it's a really cheap one. I don't like it, so I don't use it. What I do is I do a lot of thumbnail sketches that look like this part, so I get a feeling going. And then, you know, I reference a lot of different people. Like people that I like their poses would be Patrick Brown. I'm a big fan of his pose work. His poses are super expressive and just great stuff. Who else? You know, probably McFarlane is probably a huge reference for my work. I mean, not that you probably don't see it in my work a whole lot, but I love his work. But I think I pull more from anatomy from people like David Finch and Dale Kean and stuff like that. But and Ed Benez. Anyways, Ed's got some great stuff as well. So you know, collaboration of ideas. But I don't think I really referenced anything on this one, and that's probably why the legs look so weird. But so I don't use a pose doll. I reference other artists, and I practice a lot of thumbnail sketching. Sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer. Okay, so now, so I get to an area like this, and then that's when I say, okay, I feel like I got the pose going pretty well, even though that leg's weird. I end up changing that. And another thing about the pose, I also share the information a lot, and I ask for feedback, critiques from other people. And so one person was like, hey, that leg just doesn't look like it could really go that way, even for Spider-Man. And they actually even took the time to respond back. I wish I had their name in front of me, but I don't. It was on a Facebook post. howtodrawcomics.net has got a lot of helpful artists. So I'll share stuff on there and on their Facebook group, and then I'll take the feedback. I don't always take it, but if it's good feedback, I try to learn from it and improve. So if you notice, as we move way further into this, there I swap out the leg. And I'm going to show you that as well, because there's a neat way to do that in Procreate that I just recently learned. So back to the perspective thing. I'm just trying to answer some of these questions. So then I want to drop in the perspective. And so I start using the perspective guides. And you see, I first start drawing in, blocking in some of the buildings. And so this is the way I would have did it before. I would have blocked in these larger shapes, and I would have cut into these shapes and then started to define window patterns. Now for more modern cities, like the ones that Spider-Man's typically in, what is it, New York, right? So I don't even know what city, sorry. But it's it's New York, right? So so basically it's a lot of modern type buildings. Yes, you can have some buildings that have a lot better old school architecture, maybe, what is it, Gothic, Victorian, whatever. But that's where I think the grid pattern works better. Okay, so for these more modern, clean, streamlined buildings, you can just use a perspective grid. It's no problem. They're easy to draw. But I like adding this part, which looks like a total mess, but it's the same perspective guides that I already had implemented, but I took the time to draw out these lines. And then now what I can do is I can freehand over the top of this. Why is that so important? Because to me, you're going to get a more expressive feeling to your work if you freehand the concept. But you can't freehand if you don't have some kind of perspective grid. And I actually got this bit of advice from David Finch's videos on perspective. He draws in the perspective grid on each panel, or most panels, I think, and then draws over the top. And so you're typically going to get better looking details because you're freehanding. Now, this may not apply to you, right? Everybody's different. You may be like, no, I use the perspective guides in Procreate and Clip Studio, and I get better buildings. That's fine. You want to try a variety of these techniques. We're all very different, and you may need to tweak and implement various techniques to get to your secret sauce, to get to that thing that is like, whoa, eureka, I found it, right? So you got to mess around with this stuff. But for me, I find it very helpful to freehand as much as possible. Now, notice that a lot of this is crooked and misaligned, but I have those guides to rein me in, to pull me back to the sense of perspective that I need here. And then I get enough of it in there. Notice I'm not even finishing all the buildings, right? I'm doing pieces of certain buildings. You're probably like, man, dude, you can't even stay focused. That's not actually the reason. Normally it would be. It's because I know that I can actually step and repeat those and save myself some time. So I'll show you that as well. So there, I get to a point where I'm like, yep, I've got enough of that concept in place. I can now start to see how I'm stepping and repeating those little pieces under the ledge there. See that? And so I can step and repeat, move those around, use my layers to my advantage. There, I grab the leg after getting that feedback from the Facebook group. And then I maneuver that leg and then change the line work a little bit to reconnect it. And that's really how I do my poses. And then notice here on this window, I'm using the perspective guides a little bit. And not a little bit, I'm sorry. I'm using them quite a bit now. That's why all these lines are so much cleaner. But I've got that initial design work in place. And then notice what I do here with the window. Boom, bam, boom, copy, paste. I even drew some lines over in perspective right there. So those lines going to the left of the window. I drew those in on a floating layer. The reason being is that, again, just like the guides that were previously there, I can now copy this window and distort it into place. You have to distort it. You can't just simply move it over. So I want you to be aware of that. When you grab things that are in perspective, you can't move them over. You have to transform them into place. And if you have guides that represent that area, like I did right there, then it's so much easier and it lines up. It saves you a tremendous amount of time. Now, another tip about that, I would suggest that you do copy and paste things into place to save time, but then render some bit of information over top, even erase some of the lines, draw a cracked or broken brick, because it can really drain the life out of the artwork if everything is copied and pasted. And you'll see that by the time I'm done with this, I'll go back and do that, because you got to add some life to it, some debris, some broken up cracks, stuff like that. It's got to look lived in and aged. So then I go to do these bricks, and you see I'm doing the step and repeat, and I get it to about right here, and I'm like, this is just ugly. Doesn't look cool. It actually, again, sucks the life right out of it. So I go back to freehand some of it and just doing pieces of it, and I might actually use colorization techniques and not do any more bricks than that. So that's just a design choice for me, but I just wanted to, show you that. So then notice here, for window trim, I actually draw through a lot of areas with a layer and then erase back. So see how quick that is to drop those windows in? Well, this is a time lapse, but hopefully you get the idea of what I'm doing there. I'm drawing those in on a layer and then erasing back the overlaps that I don't need. Okay, so now what I want to show you, let's skew this forward. So that's how I do it. So I use both the perspective grid that I draw out, again, to freehand over top, and then I clean it up to something like this, okay? And let me get to a part where I can show you how to save yourself some time. So I think that's the biggest thing that people want to see at a process like this is how do I make this easier on myself? So a lot of times these buildings can seem daunting, right? Everybody goes to draw perspective and they're like, oh, it's just, it's hard and I get confused and blah, blah, right? And I'll be honest, I didn't use any reference for this. And you can probably tell it doesn't look very referenced, right? It doesn't look very reference heavy. Let me find the building. Really should be naming these suckers and I'm not. Where is it? Oh, up here, isn't it? There we go. Okay, so let me grab that one. And so I'm going to zoom into here. Now notice I've dropped in these windows there. And all I did here to construct this building, just so you know, is a bunch of overlapping rectangles, right? And that's why it's kind of boring, but that's really what a lot of modern buildings and futuristic buildings are. And you can incorporate angles and the way that they cut and kind of wrap around themselves in a sense. So for instance, this building right here, I could have this come over further and then, like I would have to bring this line over first and then bring it over. And I could have it wrap around and then maybe come back out here. So I could easily change the overall shape of that. It looks a bit messy. Let me try it again where it'll look more apparent. I could easily change the shape of this where it came out, back over, down like this. And then it's a little more interesting than what I have here. So a lot of times it's just paying attention to where these trim pieces and these overlaps go. For instance, let me grab an ink brush because at this point I'm more of at a cleanup stage. So if I want more detail, remember this, detail will create a dimension of size and scale. So basically what you want to think about is if I want something to look more detailed, I'm going to cut into it more. Well, that's too big of a line. I might do some lines like this. These are really off from where they needed to be. So notice how just by adding those, I create the illusion of detail in that area pretty quickly. So think about that. Like you can really create size and a massive feeling by adding little things like this. See how that immediately makes it look a little more detailed? And what is that? That's a rectangle and some lines. I mean, it's pretty simple. So it's not that things need to be ultra detailed. They just need detail in the right spots, and you're going to use line weight to help you there. Sometimes you're going to use line breaks. So sometimes it looks cool to like add in texture details and it's not very strong. It's just kind of hints to this works better for texture, by the way, hints to those areas. And then past that, it's cutting into things. So you might say, well, I want this indentation right here for some more windows. But I don't want to just put rectangles here. I mean, that might work. Sometimes I'll do stuff like this and go just kind of look at it for a bit. Does that work? But then what's going to probably make it read a little bit better is we have to remember that we're looking up and to the left. So notice that we're seeing this side of the building, right? So if we're seeing this side of the building right there, then we're going to see this side of the inset to this window. We're also looking up at the building, so we're going to see the inset right there. So again, you need to think about that when you're constructing this, and then things become a lot easier. So now if I set this back to drawing assist, and I get in here, I can say, okay, what's the depth of this material? The side of this wall, basically. And then I can draw that in. Remember, you can draw from over here and find placement, but I don't think it's that critical. It is a bit off, but I'm just trying to show. I'm probably not going to keep this. And then also, I'm going to add this layer. I'm going to set this to drawing assist, okay? And I'm going to draw right through this. Okay, and I'm going to give myself some little windows here. I could use the alignment of the other windows, but I'm not really concerned with that. Sometimes you will want to do that. Sometimes you want consistency in the design. Other times you don't. Like I might even take this and do another little cross section this way, just to change it up a bit. And then I'm going to take the eraser, make sure that's set to an ink brush. You could also use the selection tool here. And I'm going to erase back all this information here. Yeah, selection tool would probably be better for that spot. But right here I would use the ink brush. Like that. Use the selection tool here. 3-finger swipe back and forth on the screen will erase it. And so just like that, I've introduced more detail to that area. Now personally, I actually don't like that, but sometimes it's helpful to throw that stuff in there and see if you do like it. And while you're here on another layer that is set to assist, you can say, well, what if I added like another little trim piece to the top of this roof? Right, just little things like that. Sometimes a couple little design elements like that. Like it doesn't take much, and you can make something look more interesting with just these basic blocky shapes. You have to just learn to think about recessed areas, concave, convex. Okay, cutting in and then raising. You can do that all over the place. And then you can get into more interesting stuff like angles. So you can say, well, I'm gonna bring this up. If you remember that if you click and hold, I'll add one more layer for this. If you click and hold, you'll get a straight line. Okay, and then maneuver that wherever you want. Let's say that we want just this kind of weird angle right here. Then we set this back to drawing assist. And all of a sudden we've got this, I don't know, this weird angle on the top of the building. By itself, it's kind of boring, but you would do the same thing. You would start cutting into this area and then developing it further, you know, adding some trim lines, adding some window patterns. You know, I don't think I would really add this design element to it, but it's there. If I want to just mix things up a bit, that actually looks like you're seeing a building over the edge of it. So you got to be careful with stuff like that from this perspective. But you do want to mix up angles. Like for instance, you could take this one and you could put a peak on it. And remember, you can find your center for these peaks by first drawing a square in perspective, crisscrossing your corners like this. And then that's your center. See, I was a little bit off on that peak. But that's how you find your center to do your peaks in perspective, just so you know. So a lot of this is actually pretty simple. I'm actually going to get rid of this and this. I really didn't want that information there. Or actually, let me just, I'm going to do my speed undos here and go back. Yeah, because I really don't like those little windows. But that's how I do it. So that coupled with the ability to get it to this level where you've got some details in place, and the same information applies to right here. Now, one other thing I want to share is that when you're trying to get areas that look a little more interesting. Okay, so this ledge right here, for instance, right? So you go to do this ledge, and you're like, well, if you notice, this area right here isn't just rectangles. It is and it isn't. There's some angles in there. All I do there, I do the same method that I just showed you, but I take, and as I'm doing the freehand portion of it, I do something like this. Look how easy that was. All that is me taking a line and then a series of curves, like so, a back curve, forward curve. Again, I'm thinking concave, convex, okay? Down and then back one more time. Think of like trim that you see on the lower base of the wall, stuff like that. If you look at the side of it, some of it's pretty neat little curves, and that's all that is. But I'll actually draw that in first, and then if I take that from here at this exact position or wherever it is, in relationship to this perspective grid, I just now enable drawing assist, and I use that same perspective that's in place, and I draw over, and I draw down. Look at that, ledge. I mean, simple as that. And to make it look more detailed, you just give it a couple little lines, and you got to think about the recessed areas. So if you zoom up real close, notice that if I put a line back this way, my shadow would probably go right about here, right about here. If I'm going to shade these, I would actually do this in the color for this style of art that I'm getting ready to do. I'm not going to add heavy shadows, but if I was going to, I'd do that. And then I would add in some kind of trim like this All this goes to that perspective that's already in place. So that's really why I have both of these things going at the same time. I have the grid that can allow me to draw freehand and explore ideas, and then I have the perspective guides to clean up the work. Okay, so that covers that. Now let me show you one more thing, and then we'll bring this to a close, because I know this video has got to already be insanely long. But it's hard because there's a lot to cover with this. Keep in mind too that I have a full course that you can check out. I'll make sure the link's in the description box below, and I go into perspective drawing in a lot more detail, and I'm always adding to the course. Okay, so right here with these buildings. So you did this work, you've got some things going. You're like, okay, I really just want the same thing continue downward into this structure. You don't have to really keep redrawing these windows. You can, and you actually get really fast with it with layers, but to save yourself some time, you grab the area that's already in the closest perspective. Okay, so I'm going to grab this set of windows over here. I'm going to do a 3-finger swipe. Gives me this little duplicate button right there. I just duplicated those windows. Now again, you can't just simply pull them down. You can, but it won't be perfect. Okay, so let's say that we want to get the alignment right about there. And then we're going to go to freeform. You got to click it off of uniform. And then you can grab each one of these control points and you can drag these. Now, I'll be honest, this doesn't always work perfectly. You have to kind of mess around with it. But this is where the previous guides, let me get closer. And actually, let me make those guides more noticeable. This is where these guides are now more important. Because what happens is, if I align my distortion of these windows, oh, back on the guides here, gotta go back to my windows, where'd they go? Where are you little windows? Right there. Okay, so again, name your layers. I'm trying to move faster, but it's actually creating a bit of a hindrance. Okay, so you see right there that I'm lining this up to that blue line. It's right above it, right there. And I'm trying to do that and keep it aligned to this one to the left. I also have to distort this so that the angle of it, remember you got to click and hold these control points. And then you got to get that distortion to where that just lines up. Now, again, you don't have to be so critical about this, but I'm trying to show you good habits, not bad ones. So I'll pull this one down to line up to that next one. Again, I can grab just the side. I can maneuver that around just like that. And then notice I've got a little bit of this next one. So while I'm here, I'm just going to click off this, reselect it so I can do a 3-finger swipe, duplicate, pull it right down, get that next little edge. Notice it goes behind Spidey because I already got him set up as a floating layer with a flood fill, which again I think is helpful. Now this is the part where I'd probably toggle off Spidey because I want this to look right. So you got to remember that you got to go through this. Now I got him in a group, so I can toggle him off all in one fell swoop. And then yeah, so you see it's pretty lined up. Let me grab that again just to make sure, because the other thing is you want to make sure that as you're doing this, you don't progressively start to go off track. Okay, so click freeform, bring that over. Now likewise, if you copy this too many times, notice it's getting blurrier. Okay, so I need to make sure that I go back to the top one and copy that. So copy of a copy of a copy, right? So you got to be careful of that as well. But the neat thing is that since it's entirely in place now, you can go back and redraw over top of it really quickly. So again, I would take that. I also want to make sure to merge these down as I go. As long as I think they're correct, basically. So merge that down again. And then I would go to the top and select ones that I think are the best. Let me just grab one at a time here. 3-finger swipe, duplicate, bring it down. Again, freeform, and then distort. And I can always draw in more guides as well. So if I'm like, oh, this isn't looking like it's lined up as well as I hoped, you can easily just create new guides. That's what I was trying to show with the windows I did before. Sometimes it's more helpful to draw those new guides in perspective first. But you see, it becomes rather quick. It's quicker than having to redraw these windows over and over. Now another way to do it is you just take the windows from this one side and you distort the whole layer over. I didn't want to show you that because I'm trying to get you to realize that first that you need to understand the orientation of the perspective grid. There are lots of cheats, and this will allow you to explore those further. But again, the thing I want you to get to see first is how to grab components and transform them. Reason being is things like these windows right here. That's where it's really important. Larger patterns also, the other way to do it is just to draw them in a 2D way. So you can actually just create another document, draw them forward facing in a 2D way. So you draw these windows very straight and clean, maybe with the ledge, and that's it. And then you would bring that over in a copy and paste and distort those into place. So lots of ways to utilize this to save yourself a tremendous amount of time. But you'll see that once you do that and then you drop Spidey back in place, and it covers that up. Oh, I did have that bottom set of windows. But hopefully that gets the idea across. There is one other thing I wanted to show you, because one of the other questions was, when you have these poses, how do you adjust them? And you saw I moved Spider-Man's leg around. Well, one of the neat things that I just realized, and I didn't think Procreate supported this, but it actually does. I'll show you. I'll go back to the previous one. So somebody was like, hey, the leg looks weird. Doesn't look like he could really do that. Well, if I have these set up in a group, and by group, I have 2 layers inside of this group, right? And I have the line work, and I have the flood fill, okay? And before I would have had to adjust the line work and then adjust the flood fill. Well, in the group, neat thing about Procreate, and I should have known that it would do this, such a great app, you can grab both of those together, just like this. You can maneuver the leg around, you can liquefy it, you can resize it, whatever you want to do. But notice that it grabbed the line work and the flood fill. Big time saver there. So now all I got to do is go back through, erase some of the line work that I no longer need. Go back to the line, I'm on the line work, and then I want to use my sketch brush. Remember, you can get my brushes over at my Gumroad. I'll make sure there's a link in the description box below because everybody always asks what brush to use, stuff like that. But I must say, it's not the brush, folks. It's the artist. Just whatever brush you got will work. You just got to use it. Get used to it. But I know brushes make everybody feel warm and fuzzy inside. Like, I've got the same brush, same settings. It takes a little bit of that guesswork out of there, which isn't a bad thing. But then I'll go back to my flood fill, probably use my ink brush, and then I'll just fill that back in. But again, it's really nice that you can grab this whole area. Likewise, I didn't try it with the liquefy. Let me try it. Let's say that, the foot, something I want to change, right? So I go to the group right there, top level of this, and then I go to liquefy. Yeah, look at that. You can change the line work at the same time as the flood fill. This is really important because what happens is it means you can change the color with it. So if I go over here, take this one off, and I've already did this color work. Yeah, look at that. So you can distort things even after you've introduced color. Let's give him some big old muscles. Spidey's been working out. Yeah, so super cool. Just, you know me, folks. I'm a big fan of this app. It seems to be one of my favorite drawing tools. It has been for a while. So anyways, hopefully it gives you some ideas on how you can adjust things like this, really streamline your work, save yourself some time. And I'm also thinking about creating some brushes where I create a lot of these building patterns. Because again, a lot of this is right out of the brain box. I know it's nothing too advanced, but remember, you can always check reference, then create these patterns, get good at creating a series of patterns that you like, and then do away with the reference. You want to allow yourself to simplify and elaborate on concepts so that you can pull them from your memory. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Get perfection out of your head and just have fun with it. The main thing is when doing backgrounds and buildings and things like that, just make sure they're not too overly repetitive. That's probably the biggest problem I have. And that's where you do want to look at some reference and see that there's all these cool, interesting ways that buildings are constructed. I need to really incorporate some of that into my work, but then past that, just explore ideas and have fun with it. But like I said, I'm probably going to be making some brushes where, or I will be making some brushes where I create some different window patterns, building shapes, pieces that you can quickly throw in to store it into place, and maybe that'll get get the gears going for you, get you going on creating some of this stuff. But try this effect where you draw in the perspective grid and use the guides in conjunction with one another. I think it'll really help you. So as always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and I will talk to you soon.